With a new ban list dropping right after YCS Anaheim, a new format shaping up after the release of Crossover Breakers, we are forced to adapt. My last deck profile of Runic Dark Magician is still very much viable even with the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare being banned. However, I spent very little time involved within the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Over the last few months, and I haven't really been able to adapt that list for the new format, and I was at a crossroads heading into my last locals. Without knowing what any of the Raizio or Malice cards did prior to this last event, I was forced to put together a last minute deck with very limited theory. We ended up playing Blind Second Red-Eyes Fusion Turbo. Call this a Dark Magician deck, don't call this a Dark Magician deck, I don't care. The win condition is Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon, and it saw a ridiculous X1 finish for second place, losing to only Fluanderies in the final round after bricking Game 3. My rounds were Tyr, Rescue Ace, and Raizio Fiendsmith, all seeing a 2-0 sweep with the exception of the Raizio matchup to collect all 3 Ws, ultimately falling just short in the final round to Fluanderies, and I'm here to share the list with you. As I previously mentioned in the video, we did play a Blind Second Red-Eyes Fusion deck, and with that comes the worst part of the deck, which are the Garnets. We play 2 copies of Dark Magician, 2 copies of Red-Eyes Black Dragon, and the 1 copy of Red-Eyes Black Meteor Dragon. We despise seeing these cards in our hand. Opening any one of these 5 cards in our opening hand feels absolutely terrible. We do not want to see these cards at all. However, they all are unfortunately mandatory to play in this list because without them, your Red-Eyes cards and the Red-Eyes spell cards cannot resolve. So unfortunately, we are forced to play these 5 bricks. However, the strength and the ceiling that these cards bring the deck is justifiable, and the fact that Red-Eyes Black Meteor Dragon allows you to resolve Red-Eyes Fusion twice is the reason why we play 2 copies of each of these. If I was only building a list where I was planning on resolving it once, obviously you'd cut these cards down to 1 apiece. However, because of Black Meteor Dragon and the way Red-Eyes Fusion allows you, and this list allows you to simplify the game state to the point where you might sometimes do get a 4th turn, Red-Eyes Black Meteor Dragon being engraved and banishing itself to simply add you another copy of Ref, allowing you to send you your other 2 copies of Dark Magician Red-Eyes Black Dragon to the graveyard to summon your second Dragoon to essentially win the game then and there. That's the reason why we essentially up the number of bricks to potentially have quote-unquote follow-up if it does come down to it. Moving on to essentially the card that gives us our win con, we are playing 3 copies of Red-Eyes Fusion and your 3 copies of Red-Eyes Insight. Now, the reason why we do play Red-Eyes Fusion is simply due to the fact that Red-Eyes Fusion allows Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon to have 2 pops. By sending both Dark Magician and Red-Eyes Black Dragon to the graveyard, it gives Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon ability to destroy 2 monsters, inflicting damage to your opponent twice. And remember, we are essentially playing a Blind Second deck, so the idea is to clean up your opponent's board to the point where you can go pop, and then swing for game with Dragoon. And if you don't, that's where Red-Eyes Insight comes in with Red-Eyes Black Meteor Dragon, allowing you to simply banish itself to get yourself a second Red-Eyes on turn 4 if it does come down to it. However, very rarely with the other cards in this particular list, there is a need for turn 4. However, essentially, Red-Eyes Insight allows you to have some sort of insurance for turn 4, whereas Red-Eyes Fusion does all of the heavy lifting, summoning Dragoon and allowing you to push for lethal with Dragoon alone. And Dragoon, if your opponent does end up surviving, Dragoon in a simplified game state is simply unbeatable. Before going into the rest of the deck profile, I do want to take a moment to talk about Red-Eyes Fusion. Red-Eyes Fusion as a card has seen unbelievable amounts of play in Dark Magician ever since the inclusion of Verte Anaconda, and rightfully so. Verte made this card unbelievably broken. Red-Eyes Fusion has been the main way to summon Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon and the best way to summon Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon since its release. It's a 1 card that dumps both Garnets into the graveyard, giving a full-powered Dragoon with 2 pops. Now, there are unbelievable players in the Dark Magician community. Shout out Loza, Zephyr, Godsmith, Dark Magician Tactics. All these players who have utilized Red-Eyes Fusion to its absolute maximum over the last few years. However, where I think Red-Eyes Fusion has significantly been power crept. It's one of the reasons why on my channel personally you haven't seen me play with Red-Eyes Fusion too much, and that's because going first, I don't think ending on a Dragoon is enough anymore. As long as, even if you say open up Ref and like Nadir Servant has been a tech that has seen a lot of play with Red-Eyes Fusion because it allows you to play under the restrictions very, very well. Since Verte has been banned, I think just activating Red-Eyes Fusion isn't enough going first. It's Dragoon on its own can't stop your Ryzeals, Snake Eyes, Fiendsmiths, and all these other unbelievably overpowered decks on its own. Sure, Red-Eyes paired with 4 or 5 hand traps, absolutely, that could potentially stop it, but how often are you actually opening that? So I decided to take that full power Dragoon and that idea. However, I felt like its utilization was significantly better going second. And that's where this idea came from, this list came from, by simply trying to break your opponent's board to a point where they invest so many assets and so many resources into their board. You break them with 4 or 5 cards in hand, 5 board breakers in hand, and activate Red-Eyes Fusion, and then clean up the game state. And in a simplified game state, 1 Dragoon with no normal special summons, I think, is very, very viable. And that's the reason why I think a card like Red-Eyes Fusion sees its biggest potential. I won't be going into too much of an explanation as to why I play these cards. The idea is that these are probably the most generic board breakers in the game right now, and essentially what you do is you try to break your opponent's board and activate Red-Eyes Fusion on top of everything. So we start off with the quote-unquote board wipes. We do play 3 copies of Raigeki, 2 copies of Lightning Storm, 1 copy of Feather Duster. Now these 3 are pretty much the most generic board wipes, quote unquote, in the game right now. Duster, Lightning Storm to clear your opponent's back row, and Raigeki to clear your monsters. The one flaw I kind of see in this is Raigeki, simply because Raigeki as a monster board wipe does have some anti-synergy with Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon, as Dragoon needs monsters on the board to pop and inflict damage to your opponent's life points. Raigeki prevents that if Raigeki resolves. However, what Raigeki does do is it forces your opponent's monsters to activate their effects to essentially protect themselves or protect their board or negate it or whatever the case may be. And the reason why that's so strong is because we do play a card like Triple Tactics Talents and 3 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust. Now, what these 5 cards do is once your opponent interacts with them, you pretty much win the game. Seeing these cards with a card like Red-Eyes Fusion or access to your Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon, it's unbelievable. These cards are almost always online going second. Thrust essentially searches you every single normal spell and trap card in your entire deck, including your board breakers if you don't see them. So if your opponent does end up interacting with not only this, but another sub-engine that we are playing later on the deck profile, this pretty much turns on your entire engine. In addition to this, if your opponent interacts with your board breakers and you don't have access to Red-Eyes Fusion, well, Triple Tactics Thrust gets you access to Red-Eyes Fusion. And that is that. So that's why these cards see an unbelievable amount of play within this particular list. Thrust being able to search Red-Eyes Fusion is absolutely broken. The amount of times that happened yesterday, you know, just single-handedly wins me the game. Pair it with a Talents is also really, really strong. To finish off the board breakers, we do play 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone because you can never have enough back row removal, and we play 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. Once again, Forbidden Droplet is just one of those cards that is unbelievably strong right now. You know, both of the new decks in the format have these really, really oppressive monsters that just it's so difficult to deal with unless their effects are completely negated. Additionally, Forbidden Droplet with a card like Red-Eyes Fusion, like if your opponent has a full board and you just Droplet for 3 alongside of your ref, allowing your Dragoon to resolve is just mind-blowing. Droplet and Red-Eyes Fusion can win some games on their own sometimes, and that's essentially the reason why we're playing it. Droplet is one of my favorite cards in the game right now. Cyclone is, like I said, pretty self-explanatory. It's a spell and trap removal alongside of Duster. And I feel like it's just generically very good. It hits the Fiendsmith back rows to essentially allow them to stop having them from having those negates off Denier. The problem when theory crafting this list was that this list only had one specific choke point. If your opponent knew what to stop, in this case Red-Eyes Fusion, you didn't have your win condition. Doesn't matter how many times you can break your opponent's board, your win con is evaporated and you no longer have a way to actually win the game. So the way I did that was to supplement an additional engine that can add layers and different choke points for your opponent to be constantly guessing, and if they do deal with Red-Eyes Fusion, you can still play the game. And the best engine I found that helps us do that is Sky Striker. Not only is Sky Striker an engine that is very, very strong on its own, but in addition to this, Sky Striker can also have multiple ways to help you push into a board very well. Additionally, the Sky Striker cards surprisingly trade very, very well into Ryzeal. So we do play 3 copies of Sky Striker Engage, 3 copies of Widow Anchor, 2 copies of Shark Cannon, and then the one-ofs after this, we do play the 1 multi-roll, the 1 Afterburner, and the 1 Hornet Drones. So essentially what these cards allow us to do is, on top of our board breakers, these trade very well into a lot of boards, but additionally, they help you generate advantage for yourself. Also, what these cards do is they set up some sort of follow-up. Not every single game will you be able to break your board and kill them, break your opponent's board and essentially beat them right then and then. So what these cards allow us to do is essentially set up some sort of follow-up, whether it's setting your Widow Anchors or having multi-roll set your Hornet Drones, Shark Cannon, things like that. Shark Cannon is also really, really strong into the Fiendsmith matchup, which is something to keep in mind. But a lot of these cards, they not only generate you advantage, but they have some sort of follow-up. And summoning your Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon in the extra monster zone, allowing you to have all these cards online all the time, is something that is very underlooked when people, immediately look at this list. Because what these cards allow us to do is, if we don't end up beating our opponent, they do set up additional layers for us to interact with our opponent if our opponent has a crackback. Those were 37 of the 40 cards in the main deck. The last 3 cards, I was iffy on whether I want to play board breakers or not. However, I chose not to and simply chose to play 3 copies of Upstart Goblin. Upstart Goblin is just one of those cards that thin your deck out to 37 cards. Additionally, what these cards do is they give you spells in the graveyard for your Sky Striker Engage to give you a free draw every turn, alongside of turning on your Sky Striker spells. The alternative, the extra effects for your Sky Striker spells. So these not only fill your graveyard with spell cards, it gives you an extra card in hand, and it thins your deck for consistency reasons, because we do play some Garnets. So that's that, and that's the main deck. It's performed exceptionally well for what I needed it to do. Moving on to the extra deck, there are only really about 6 mandatory slots that you have to play in this particular list. The rest of them are completely flex spots for you to do whatever you want with them. The absolutely mandatory cards that you have to play are your 2 copies of Red-Eyes Dark Dragoon. Without it, you essentially don't have a win condition. Alternatively, Red-Eyes Fusion can't resolve. So 2 copies of Dragoon is an absolute must. We then play 1 of the Sky Striker cards. You only need 1 of each. You're almost never going to be even going into the second ones late game. Maybe if you want, Kagari can be played at 2 if it's something that you really, really want. But these are the absolute mandatory cards that you have to play in the extra deck. The rest is completely up to you and your personal preference. So for this particular event, what I did was I just played the 1 SP Little Knight, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 the Dark Charmer, 1 Celine, 1 Access Code. This package here, the Dark Celine access code, is actually pretty decent in a blind second list. In the grind game, if it does come down to it, turn 5, if you do need a win condition, the Sky Striker cards essentially give you a free link fodder for Dark into Celine, into access code, things like that. Well, they don't give you access to Dark, but like if you talents take a Dark monster, you know what I mean. Access code being a monster that you could just, you have 4 attributes to clean up whatever is left on the board. And then proceed to game with access code. That's an option that you might want to have, in late games. But like I said, this isn't mandatory. This is personal preference. I actually never went into any one of these cards in the event, so totally up to you. This is just strictly theory. The last cards I do play are my Ultimate Slayer targets, which I do play in the side deck. So I play Garura, Golden Cloud Beast, and I played Natis as well. So essentially what these cards do is, because I do play Ultimate Slayer in the side deck, so these are probably the best Ultimate Slayer targets, I think, in my opinion. You can play the Live Twin card as well, but I didn't want to add the extra brick in my deck for the purposes of an extra interaction. If I do play a link deck, I'll just send, Nightmare Phoenix or SP Little Knight to deal with a problematic monster. like that. So that's it for the extra deck. Essentially, I will quickly go over the side deck that I took with me to my last event that saw some success. Like I said, this is personal preference. You can play whatever you want. The side deck is, you know, you're almost always going second, so pair your side deck up to whatever's in your locals. But one of my favorite cards of all time, we do play 3 copies of Ultimate Slayer. 3 copies of Droll is really good. 3 copies of Dimension Barrier if, you know, if your opponent tries to get sneaky with you and makes you go first. You know, there are situations where sometimes I would just side in 1-dimensional barrier into a Ryzeal matchup, game 3, if my opponent does force me to go first, which does happen sometimes, and D-Barrier just, you know, turns off that deck very well. Alongside of D-Barrier, there was Tempai. Tempai is dead now, but like pre-ban list, D-Barrier would stop Tempai, and Tempai did love to go first. Love to go second. So if you knew you're in a Tempai matchup, you just side in the 3 D-Barriers and go from there. This card I really didn't like, I never sided it in, was the 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. If you're playing against a deck that is absolutely, they're like a lot of those jank decks that, you know, build these ridiculous boards that are like, you can't destroy them, can't target them, can't do anything to them. So Dark Ruler No More is pretty okay in that regard. If it comes down to it, the problem with Dark Ruler No More is that you can't kill your opponent through it. And the last 3 cards is your just Ash Blossom. I didn't know what else to play, so I just threw in the 3 Ash Blossoms. One card I was thinking about down the line was a card like Winter Cherries. And the reason for Winter Cherries is because we have so much dead space in our extra deck that Winter Cherries can actually come up. And it might be a very interesting tech option for this upcoming format, but it's something I do want to experiment with. So that's it for the deck profile. Thank you so much for watching. Before ending this video, I do want to just take a second to apologize for the long hiatus. I've been going through some stuff, but hopefully it's going to be cleared up now. And I will be back to making Dark Magician content, as well as a new theory, new ideas. I have some ideas for where I want to take the deck going forward and in future formats. But for the time being, like I said, I didn't know what to expect from the new format. I didn't know what I wanted to play. I didn't know how I was going to revise my last list or anything like that. So I just played this Unga Bunga Go Second list, and it did exceptionally well. So I had to share it with you all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see all of you in the near future. And if I don't see you before the holidays, I wish you guys all a Merry Christmas for those who celebrate. Happy holidays for those who don't. Happy New Year. And I will see you in the very near future. Bye.